Hello and welcome to episode 2 of this podcast. In this episode, we're going to differentiate between four words and their meanings. The first is ignorance, the second is illusion, the third is delusion, and the fourth is hallucination. We're going to begin with ignorance. Before Copernicus came along, ancient people believed that the sun went around the earth. But they could not be blamed for doing so. It appeared that way. But as time went on, people began to make astronomical observations, they began to make calculations, geometry played a role, and eventually, putting all this together, Copernicus said that it is the other way around. It is the earth that goes around the sun, and so do the other planets. Now, this is an example of ignorance because ancient people couldn't be blamed. There was just no knowledge of the facts. There was just no way, there were no tools to figure out that what was really going on. So, why does it appear that way then? That it is the sun that goes around the earth? That brings us to the second word, illusion. Our perceptive apparatus, our perception, leads us to believe that the sun, because we see it rising in the horizon and traveling across the sky and setting in the west, obviously is the one that is moving. We must be still. But it was people like Galileo who figured out that if you're standing on a massive object like the Earth, even though it's spinning at a huge speed and traveling at a massive velocity through the space around the sun, you cannot feel it at all because you are moving at the same speed. It seems to you as if you're stationary. You only have to think of when you're sitting in an aeroplane and traveling. You don't feel like you're moving at 800 kilometers per hour, even though the aeroplane is actually traveling at that speed. So, that is an illusion that is created by our perceptual apparatus and by the way that physics works. Now, there's something interesting about illusions. Even if you know, for example, that it is the earth that travels around the sun, every day if you actually observe, it is going to be very hard for you to really have the feeling that you're standing on a giant sphere and moving around the sun. That illusion continues to operate even if you know the facts. That is, even though you're no longer ignorant, the illusion continues to operate. What then is delusion? Let's say that even after coming to know the facts, even after the proofs have been laid before you that it is the earth that goes around the sun, and even after all this, you continue to insist that it is just not possible. It is the sun that goes around the earth. Then that's an example of delusion. You're deluding yourself, you are suffering under a delusion. Someone might also deliberately suppress the facts about the earth going around the sun, keep it from you, and because now you are ignorant, but everyone else and the truth is known, so you will be the only one deluded in the entire population. That is delusion. The last on our list is hallucination. Let's say that one day, when looking out at the sky, you suddenly feel that the sun is a huge flaming angel that is shedding a massive ray of light across the whole planet. And it really seems to you that way. And you go around telling people, it is a massive flaming angel. That's what is up there in the sky. Now, that's a hallucination because you are the only one, because of some trick of the imagination or because of some other problem, you're imagining something that just isn't there. So that's a hallucination, something that just isn't there. Let's look at a more interesting example of illustrating these four words. Let's say that you go to see a famous magician performing his magic show. You buy your ticket, you're there in the audience, and like any good magician, he now proceeds to go through his routine. Each item in his repertoire is an illusion that he is creating. For example, let's say he takes a handkerchief from a member of the audience and he says, I'll now make this disappear. And he waves it around, and it looks as if the handkerchief has disappeared. Now, there is no law of physics that is being violated here. It is not that he really has somehow dissolved the handkerchief into thin air. And all of us know that this is an effect he has created, and the handkerchief actually is now hidden somewhere else. And how he achieved this effect is by utilizing the way in which the human attention works. Magicians understand human attention very well, and they know how to direct and misdirect your attention. So, at a moment when your attention was elsewhere, he has now moved this handkerchief in such a skillful manner that you believe it has vanished. Therefore, a magician is really creating illusions. He has practiced them, and he is using these illusions to entertain. We are willing to be entertained in this manner. It's fun. That's the reason we go to the magic show. But almost all of us know that it is something that the magician has practiced a number of times, and it is an effect that he is creating. There is no way that a handkerchief can dissolve. And one could narrate very many examples of magic effects that such magicians create. Coming back to one of our first words, we are ignorant of how he does it. And therefore, we are a prey to this illusion that he creates. But let's assume that there is a member of the audience, say a friend of yours whom you have taken along, and he says, Hey, this is a real magician. And what he means by a real magician is someone who's actually making the handkerchief dissolve somehow into empty space. In other words, he has somehow violated physical laws and he has made the handkerchief vanish into empty space. Now, this friend of yours is suffering from a delusion. And in fact, such deluded people are the ones who believe in the illusions created by godmen. And that's the reason there are so many godmen who perform such tricks. They make ash appear where none was before, and many other tricks of that kind. So at this point, we can use the word tricks because this godman is deliberately tricking you. He is deliberately capitalizing on your delusion. And he is using these illusions to deceive and to trick you. Obviously, he stands to gain because people who follow such godmen make vast donations to them, give them money, and so on. As a last and final example, let's consider a rainbow. Let's say one day you're standing outside in a slight drizzle of rain, and when you look up into the sky, you see a beautiful rainbow. And usually, when a rainbow appears, a lot of people begin to spot it, and you start seeing people appearing on the tops of their houses. Everyone is taking pictures on their phones, posting it, sending it to people, and it's truly a beautiful sight. But a rainbow is actually an illusion. When sunlight passes through the water droplets that are in the drizzle, in the rain, the sunlight splits up into the component colors. This is something that every one of us as children learn. The Vibgyor, as we call it, the violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, red, that is the rainbow, is actually the different wavelengths that when white light passes through a prism, or in this case the rain, the white light gets split into these components. And why is it that we see color? It's because the human vision is set up in such a way, you can read this up, that we see each of these wavelengths in a different way. And that is what gives rise to what we call color. Color, now every scientist knows, is not some inherent property out there in the universe. There is no such thing as redness. That is just the way that particular wavelength of light appears to us. In fact, animals with different perceptual apparatus, different vision systems, like dogs, for example, which can only see in black and white because they don't possess what we possess. Now, are you going to say that that perception is wrong? And there are birds that can see wavelengths that you and I cannot see, that the human vision cannot see. So, does that mean that the bird sees a truer picture? No, it is just that the bird, for its survival, needs to distinguish those wavelengths, and so its perceptual apparatus has evolved that way. So, a rainbow is an illusion, ultimately. Now, you might be ignorant of how a rainbow is formed, and in that case, you could very easily get deluded into believing that it is a sign sent by God, a message to the humans. That's a delusion. Or you could believe that a heavenly archer is bending his bow preparatory to sending a heavenly arrow. That's a delusion. Now, after listening to all this, you might think, you've spoiled the rainbow for me if you didn't know the facts. But remember, even those who know the facts, who are not ignorant and who know it's an illusion, they enjoy the rainbow too. They too come rushing out and see the rainbow. If someone points it out to them, they are perfectly happy to go and look at it. So, if you remember in our first episode, we mentioned this, that knowing the facts, knowing the science, doesn't mean that we stop enjoying the stories. So, in this episode, we discussed the sun going around the earth, or the earth going around the sun. We discussed the magician and his repertoire of his performances, and we discussed the rainbow. In all these three cases, we can enjoy the illusions even though we are not ignorant of the facts. You can still tell stories, you can still write poems about the sun and how it travels through the sky, or stood still at some particular time in history because somebody made it stand still. You can enjoy those stories. You can enjoy the rainbow. You can enjoy the magic show. And we'll talk more about why this distinction between ignorance, illusion, delusion, and hallucination is important as we go through the next episodes in our podcast.